coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, as always, Molch-R, and on this episode we have the second part of our two-part interview with Kev O'Neill. Now, as I said last week, the feedback on episode 1 was so fantastic. Thank you so much for everybody who dropped us a line to say that they enjoyed it. Same again this week, another 2+ hours of chat with the master. I know I've already said this, but I can't really thank Kev enough for how generous he was with his time and with his recollections. We barrel along in this half, so we cover a lot of ground. There's bits I would have loved to have talked to him more about. Various elements about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Marshal Law, both of which we talk extensively about, but those could fill podcast episodes on their own. So sorry if we didn't get to your favourite Kev O'Neill moment, but we cover, like I said, we cover a lot of ground. So again, thank you to Kev for spending so much time chatting, and thank you to everybody who's enjoyed them so far. We will continue with the lockdown tapes every week. In fact, we've got some really interesting conversations coming up in the future with some familiar faces from the past, as well as talking about what's forthcoming from 2000 AD. Now, since you're listening to this, it kind of behooves me to mention the casting news about the Penguin audiobook adaptations of classic 2000 AD. The casting's got announced the other day, with people like Joseph Fiennes as Judge Dredd, and it's just go along to 2000 AD / 2000AD.com/news and have a look for yourselves. Big names, and we're going to be talking to some of the team behind the Penguin Random House audiobooks in a future episode. But I've heard little clips of what they've done, and it's sounding pretty good. So if you were a fan of the Big Finish audiobooks, or even the Dirt Mags produced 1990s Radio 1 adaptations of Judge Dredd and stories like that, then you're in for an absolute treat. They're coming out at the beginning of next month. So we're going to, as always, crack on and get on to the second half of our chat with Kev O'Neill. Sit down, make sure you've got a beverage of your choice next to you, and enjoy the next 2+ hours of me chat to Kev.
Right.
Because there's a couple of things I want to loop back around to talk about. Also, obviously, there's Marshal Law and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, etc., etc. One of the things I did want to talk more about, because we briefly touched on it last time, was about being raised Catholic. Now, this is something that you share in common with Pat. But I was intrigued by your comments about you weren't just raised Catholic in the family unit. You were part of a community. The area that, I think you said the area you grew up in was a Catholic area, and I'm very aware that even in the 20th century, being Catholic in England is still a relative rarity. Considering the history of Catholicism in England, and I just wanted to get a sense of how that impacted on your life, on your the personality, the way that you view the world, and whether there's an element of, or whether you had a feeling when you were younger of being part of a small community, whether there was a sense of being an outsider in any way, shape, or form that has informed your work as it's developed.
I suppose going to a Catholic school, you felt different. uniforms, traditions, marches, and things like that. Not kind of heroic for the struggle marches, but just marches around the church and so on. But actually, I've never felt more Catholic. I've been less Catholic, but felt more Catholic than not that many years ago when I visited Belfast. I hadn't actually realised, as stupid as this may sound, but actually how intensely Catholic my name was. I mean, both parts of it, are just are very, very Catholic, aren't they? There was no. I didn't pick up any hostility, except once from some very tough-looking older guys when I was introduced to them. A sort of frisson there was, and it didn't really occur. I thought they just didn't like me, but it was only afterwards I realised being introduced as Kevin O'Neill at a Protestant wedding, wasn't the warmest of circumstances. It's. I didn't actually notice. I mean, when you're a kid, I suppose you really do notice these things. It's just normal. I think it was probably council policy to keep people grouped together. So, like I say, on the Cold Harbour estate in Mottingham, it was largely Irish Catholic, and going to Catholic school. Your friends, everybody would be Catholic until really I started work. It probably, it probably impacted perhaps more than I'm giving it credit for. I couldn't really isolate anything and say, this was momentous.
Because it's interesting how the reaction against his Catholic youth is something that seems to motivate Pat in a lot of what he does. That sense of a dislike of authority, and I know he had a really horrid time at school. Do you share that kind of righteous anger, or was it more of
No, it was kind of a phase. It was a bit of my past. Thing I've said before. I mean, when I was, very, very young, I didn't believe a word of it. This applies to, just the acts of believing in it. And it made me. I was kind of cynical as a kid, but I don't carry it around with me. It doesn't. I mean, the brutal nuns and the ferocious teachers. Well, I think they're ferocious. In the era I grew up in, there were ferocious teachers everywhere, and corporal punishment was, very, very common. And believe it or not, we do laugh about it nowadays. If you meet anyone who went to school in the 50s, it was a kind of Dennis the Menace land. It was canings and slipperings and all that kind of thing. But no, I don't carry it around with me, and I certainly don't want to. I don't want it to haunt me the way it does some people. It's and as I say, it's a bit sad, a bit of a sad way to live, really. But then perhaps I just didn't have the experiences other people had to be so haunted.
Because I wanted to talk a little bit about it, just because I want to discuss Nemesis a little bit more. We talked about it previously, but I think it's just it's one of those archetypal 2000 AD strips, and like so much of 2000 AD, I think we mentioned this as well. Nemesis is a great character, but the presence of Torquemada in that strip is what makes it. This absolutely dastardly evil being, and rereading it recently, it just feels as if you were having an enormous amount of fun just making this more and more extreme, drawing on that kind of Gothic heritage, but just throwing so many ideas in there. I mean, you mentioned about your kind of deadline issues. Was it the fact that you were just throwing the kitchen sink at this stuff just because it was fun and it was, what you wanted to do?
Yeah, well, I think for all of us back then, if you hit a strip, which was really your thing, you kind of wanted to, as far as possible, kind of strut your stuff. This was a chance to break out, because I had a lot of fun on road buses, sharing it with Dave Gibbons early on and Mick McMahon later. And I really enjoyed that. But having a strip of your own was the kind of goal. And this was purpose built. I mean, it really was purpose built from the ground up for me and Pat. And Steve McMahon just let us roll with it. And the more you're always reaching for the edges, for the limits of when are they going to say enough is enough. And it always came out in sort of weird. It just came out in weird ways, odd bits of censorship and misunderstandings of what they were looking at, and it's that thing of I think from a management point of view, or more of an editorial, we did know what we were up to, but management would look at things and just think, I know there's something wrong here, but I can't quite put my finger on it. But I hadn't realised until meeting people who grew up with it, who were much younger, how much it terrified readers. I honestly didn't realise that. I just thought it was really blackly funny, kind of comedic, rather than a horror comic type of impact. But Torquemada was he was just a gift. The crazier it got, the worse he behaved, the more popular it was, which offers all kinds of encouragement. I think, like I said before, I'd like to have done more with Nemesis, but he was constantly overshadowed, and then when I left, I haven't actually read any of them since I left.
Oh, right.
Because I caught a glance of a couple and thought, it's that thing of, it's not the art, it's actually because Pat and I worked closely on the whole thing, and it wasn't quite what I would have done. And I thought, I'm actually happier just letting it roll on its own thing with other people. And I came back occasionally to parachute it in at the end of episodes, which I hadn't seen the beginning of, right. Serials, because I was very, very attached to it. It was tailor-made for me, I think, and it did have a sort of an underground comic vibe as well. I try to give it that anyway,
How much were the stories a collaboration between you and Pat? Was it a back and forth, or was Pat coming up with these concepts and leaving you up to just develop the look of them yourself?
Well, we talked for hours on the phone, and when the laughter really got going, we knew we had something, because it was just the joy of coming up with an idea for a scene and making the other person laugh. It was a collaboration like that. So we worked that way for however many, it wasn't that many years, but a few years, and later it'd be the same on Marshal Law. Almost exactly the same, really, the way we worked. Working with Alan Moore was different again. But Nemesis was sort of, for me, my sort of high watermark for 2000 AD is the stuff I enjoyed the most. And if I do any kinds of signings, a pile of usually decaying 2000 ADs is usually plomped in front of me to sign. It's always Nemesis. Occasionally, someone might have a Prog 1, want me to sign next to Farg's head. That seems to be a story that everyone seems to be aware of. I did that little Tharg's head under the space spinner. No, it was great. It was great. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I haven't really analysed it. It probably wouldn't be very healthy for me. I wouldn't have thought, looking back on it, because it is extremely strange. Even comparing it to what 2000 AD runs today, it's still very strange. It's a very odd strip, and kind of kudos to actually Steve McManus for letting it run, because there would have been editors who would have easily said, actually, no, this isn't, they'd want they probably want, I don't know, a humanoid alien form or something, or you can't have a KKK looking characters and that sort of thing. There's all kinds of, I can see all kinds of situations where it wouldn't have worked out the way it did. And also in those days, we could ring up, me and Pat could ring up and just say, we're doing it. Quite as monstrous as that, but, this is what we'd like to do.
Yeah. And
it'd be okayed on the phone. There wasn't a kind of a staff meeting about it or a management meeting. You just get to go ahead and they're fine, do it. And of course, I'd immediately fall late. So,
because you came back for the last episode in I think it was it around 2000?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Where you drew the final confrontation between Nemesis and Tokyo. What were your feelings drawing that?
Well, the original plan years earlier was I'd come back for the final serial. That was the plan, but I was full time on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. I just didn't have a time, and I didn't actually plan to do the final episode anyway. By that point, I thought it was unfair to the regular artist, to be honest. Have me sort of parachute in and just do my thing. But everyone seemed to be fairly insistent on it. I just wanted to do lead up to that final. I had an image of the two of them fused together for the final scene, because I thought graphically that would look really cool. The shapes work. Tall commander's head to be the sort of prow of a blitz spear, and they're sort of locked together for all time. So that was what was behind that. And then, of course, when we come back, it was a problem. When you come back again, it was a tricky one. We were going to do a flashback story or a prequel or something. But I think kind of, I've been somewhat put off by prequels in the cinema. It's a sort of, I thought it'd be more daring if we did something that continued where we'd left it. Where we said we wouldn't go back to. It's more, but the problem was having so few pages. Had one idea, and I had another idea, and we had to sort of collude to make them work together. I don't know. It was fun, but it was sort of starved of space.
Yeah.
I felt, could have done with more page, could have done with a spread in there. That would have been helpful. But you agree to do something, and you try and do the best you can in the space you're given. Plus, I was still, of course, working on League.
Looking at that final episode, what struck me is how while your style has remained, instantly recognizable, you're a very different artist now to what you were in the 1980s when you were working on Nemesis. It's almost as if you've refined your style down to in places, almost like a suggestion of what's
Yeah.
there, rather than delineating every single line. It's very much this is the essence of Kevin O'Neill, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's possibly true for anyone as they get. If you draw constantly, and as you get older, you try and refine it. Because when you're a young person, the easiest, one of the best ways to impress an editor is by the sheer amount of work you're prepared to put in. I mean, so if you're prepared to, I don't know, crosshatch, stipple dot, airbrush, all those things can cover a multitude of sins in the actual artwork, but they look like the person's getting their money's worth out of you because they're getting the time put in. So there's a degree of that, but it did create a kind of lush, sort of textured feel to Nemesis, plus all the zipper toning and so on. So that creates a difference of its own, of course, it's a bit schizo switching from League to Nemesis, where we're going back decades, and it's a kind of odd. I found it very odd to do. It's but the muscle memory for drawing the characters is there. I just draw them year in, year out, and there's the Blitzby just falls at the pen. Really, I love drawing it. But I'm not sure it's always a problem going back to things you used to do that people liked. I often wonder if it's best just to leave them alone. I mean, that's what's happened with Marshal Law. There's not going to be any more. That's done. League is done. And certainly Nemesis and Robust, all those things are done. It's otherwise it becomes a bit of a nostalgia fest. It's and I think we've all seen enough of that where it doesn't work in all kinds of entertainment. So yeah, it's. I'm not retired. I'll slip back in now. I know it's decades ahead of where we got to. But despite all the rumours, I'm always surprised when people describe me as retired. Because I haven't retired.
Wait,
it just looks that way.
Well, I was just about to say, where do you think that's come from?
I probably a misreading of something Alan has said.
Right.
And I think once these things take hold, I think once they get grafted onto, I don't know, Wikipedia or something, that's it. Then you're described as a retired. I mean, neither of us are retired, and I think generally, I've heard of very few comic people who actually retire. I mean, I know we're jumping around a bit now, but I mean, I was talking to Alan once, this was a few years ago, saying how different your perception of career really is as you get older. When I was a young man in 2018, I remember talking to, it's probably Dave Gibbons and Mick McMahon, about loving drawing comics, and I think we were probably talking about Dudley Watkins died at the drawing board, as did Reg Bunn, and both had their final work taken off the drawing board and finished in the office, that kind of thing. And I remember saying, that's how I want to go, the final pages I draw taken out of my sort of taken out of my rapidly decaying fingers and taken into the office. That was a heroic comic book end. Well, it actually doesn't look, rigor mortis Kev doesn't look so good when you're actually past 60. You think, well, actually, no, I wouldn't like that. It's really horrible. I want to just, in my own time, finish exactly what I want to finish.
Yeah.
Which in this case was League. And then have time afterwards to do all the things I've had to say no to over the years, any bits of design work or illustration stuff. So that was the plan then. But I suppose that's why I'm less keen on returning to old strips. It's people do ask, and I understand that. I was exactly the same when I was that much younger. It's I wanted to see people. I wanted to see Will Eisner drawing with spirit. Just draw a spirit. I didn't care that he didn't want to draw a spirit anymore. That's what I wanted. So it's a natural thing. But no, I'm sort of done with the old characters. Yeah, where do we start with this? I've sort of simply gone off down a complete cul-de-sac. Sorry, it's probably set us back 40 years now, hasn't it?
It's fine. We can loop right back down. I wanted to ask in the context of this about the moment when you went freelance. You walked away from 2000 AD,
mm-hmm.
and you started going freelance. Was that a sense of was there a sense of relief when you did that, or was it a difficult transition to go from effectively an office job to being your own master?
Well, if I was in the office fairly frequently, so it still felt kind of the same. I still sort of schmoozed with people in the office and was on the phone to the guys in the office. But it was just a great feeling, a liberating feeling, really, because I'd had enough in the office politics. I mean, management-wise, rather than the actual office, was so uncomfortable, and I was getting fed up with it. It's plus I wanted to cause my trouble from the outside. which really did actually happen. So that was good. No, I'd love being freelance, and never had a proper job since. So that was good.
It was around this time that Tharg's Head Revisited was published. The some would say ill-advised from an editorial point of view, giving artists free rein to vent, shall we say? What was your feeling at the time? Because a lot of the accounts of this period talk about the frustration people were feeling, whether it was Mick or Brian or Dave, whoever, and the allure of working in America coming up. I wanted to get. Do you recall what your feelings were at the time? And were you frustrated with the situation? With IPC?
Yeah, there's a number of things happening at all at the same time back then. There was the lure of America. We saw Brian Bolland first of all doing covers for America, and then doing Camelot 3000 and really getting on. But leading up to that, it was an open goal for DC really, because artwork wasn't returned. There were no royalties. Titan books were coming out in ever increasing numbers. There was nothing from them. We got to do the covers. It was this incredible frustration, and I think I may have said before, the Society of Strip Illustrators formed, and the powerful guys who turned up, for Don Lawrence's and Ron Embleton's and so on, they were fully expecting a kind of more of a union situation. Last thing management would have wanted, of course, but when they saw it was really what they described as a talking shop, just people standing around drinking beer and gassing, so they dropped out, which is a terrible pity, though the delightful Brian Lewis, the great Brian Lewis, he remained friends with us on 2000. He was a really terrific guy. And he had lots of stories, no more encouraging than anything we were going through about how you're treated and, not being rewarded for this, that, the other. It made the environment perfect for a publisher like DC to sort of cherry pick Brian and then Dave Gibbons, and then kind of work their way through 2000 AD effectively, and Warrior. But I mean, unless you dug out an old interview with me from that time, I don't recall actually thinking about it too deeply. I mean, we were enjoying working for 2000 AD, but we were unhappy at the same time.
Yeah.
Because it was, well, like I said before, me and Mick got a pay rise, and I made Pat Mills unhappy, and I don't know. Everything seemed to be bloody awkward, and yeah, I'm just trying to think what was going through my head at the time, because it's playing a risky old game if you're freelance. You're putting your eggs in. You're at least guaranteed employment to some degree on 2000 AD. At DC, it was by no means certain they're going to give you more work, and you would sort of assume that there wouldn't be that much work for you. Because they have so many people of their own. But no, that's all I can. That's all I can really add to that.
I guess it must be quite, as you say, it's a feeling of not entirely being a sure thing, because ultimately your stuff out of including Mick, out of that generation of artists who started working in America around about the same time, the so-called British invasion, your artwork was probably the least commercial, the least like the DC house style. You can understand why they would have wanted Brian, for example, on cover.
Absolutely,
and the same.
Absolutely,
yeah. The same with Dave Gibbons. You look at your stuff and as great as it is, that surely that would have terrified them.
Well, they did ask me what I wanted to do, and I gave them a list, and they said, "Don't you want to do anything we still publish?" Because it was all Trace. So it was a Spectre, it was Metal Men, Black Hawk thing. I mean, I like the stuff they used to publish. They wouldn't let me anywhere near Batman, which was.
I mean, that's just insane, because he's the most gothic of all their characters, surely.
Yeah, and I'm just remembering there's something about Batman. They weren't actually looking for Batman artists. It wasn't they didn't want me to do it. It was Batman had slumped somewhat, but they were putting all their attention on Superman. They were looking for Superman artists, really. I mean, to the point where my first visit ever to a DC offices, Julie Schwartz walked in a room, was introduced to me and said, "Do you want to draw Superman?" He'd never even seen my work. He just shook my hand and Mark Wolfman or Len Wein, what somebody said, Julie, you haven't seen what he does." But it was that kind of, I mean, at that point, there was a great missed opportunity where me and Alan were going to do the Bizarros. That would have been fun. That would have been really good.
That would have been incredible.
But it had the total misfortune to fall at exactly the same time as John Byrne revamping Superman and dropping all that stuff. Someone told me, "It'll all come back." But what does, you won't be interested. It's so that was part of a chain of projects with Alan long before League, but never almost happened, never did. I'm going. I tend to go a bit off chronology,
No.
Michael, you may have noticed,
It's absolutely fine. It's if anything, it's good to kind of talk around things and get a sense of how everything is kind of interconnected chronologically. But I mean, it leads me to the perfect point to talk about Alan, because up until this point, you've been known for your collaboration with Pat. How did you come to start working with Alan?
Well, go back a long time. Well, we go back about 45 years when I first met him at one of the Westminster comic marts. It used to be a regular thing. We'd have a mooch around the tables and pick up stuff and end up in a sort of pizza place downstairs. And Warrior was coming out and it was doing great. So I spoke to Alan and I said how much I enjoyed his Marvel Man work he was doing. So we got chatting, and somehow or other I ended up being contacted by Mike Gold, and Mike Gold was a sort of PR guy for DC Comics, and he was the one who I think showed people at DC what was happening on 2000 AD. He's being sent copies, and obviously being sent Warrior as well. They were like stablemates at the time. And he asked me if I had, anything to... No, actually, I'm getting this slightly wrong. Mike Gould then moved to First Comics. That was right. They started First Comics. So you had Howard Chaykin's American Flag. That was a huge hit. Very, very popular in Britain. Howard came over for a Birmingham convention and so on. Mike Gold sort of asked me if there was anything I wanted to do for First Comics. I talked to Mick McMahon a lot at the time, and I wanted to work with, a writer over here. And I'm pretty certain this is how it worked out. Contacted Alan, went up to see him in Northampton, and worked out that we'd do a kind of split book, like the old Tales of Suspense. One character at the front of the book, one at the back. So I'd do one series and Mick McMahon would do another, and there'd be kind of features, bits and bobs in between. And we'd alternate on covers. And Alan was going to call it Dodge and Logic.
Right.
It was a title he had from his teenage days. He'd always wanted to use it. We worked out some stories. Oh, Alan did. Said what we'd like to draw. Alan worked out some stories or apps for us. I don't think there was much in the way of artwork done. But it was all sent off to Mike Gold. And I got this strange letter back, which I had to relay to Mick and Alan, which was Mike Gold with his fan hat on, say yes, but with his editorial hat on, had to say no. So that was done. It was done and dusted. It was finished. And then a few years later, Nick Landau was going to publish comics at Titan, years before Titan Comics. Again, I did something with Alan, or worked up something that's going to be more like kind of Fighting American, a kind of satirical thing, but it was all set in an airport. I didn't think it was right for me. I dropped down the line saying I didn't actually. I couldn't really have drawn a strip set entirely in an airport. Couldn't have done it. But anyway, that all fell apart. But anyway, none of those things were published. I think that involved Dave Gibbons, Brian Bolland, Frank Miller. A lot of people were prepared to be involved in all of these Titan books back then. I'm trying to think. Then there was the Bizarros. And then Alan rang me up and said, with impeccable timing, he's going to speak to Dick Giordano, and Dick thought Alan and I would make a good team on the Spectre. But I'd just done samples of the Spectre, art samples, with Michael Fleischer.
Right.
The Spectre Rise from the 70s. Who I got to know briefly in New York, and he stayed with us over here in London. And as far as I was concerned, I'd given my word to Michael that I was going to do Spectre with him.
Yeah.
When I told him about all this, Michael, he said, we were just part of what Americans call a bake-off. They get lots of different teams of people to submit ideas and choose the best, which I thought was really kind of horrible. If you find out afterwards, it's horrible. If you find out before, you can say no, can't you? So it was one of those, it was a waste of time. I had to say no to Alan. Michael said if he'd been me, he'd have said yes to Alan. He's more pragmatic than I was. I thought you give your word, you give your word. But so yeah, that didn't work. It didn't actually. Nothing works until League. It was. No. Actually, that's not entirely true. It is. I'm forgetting. Green Lantern Corps and some Amiga men.
Yeah.
Green Lantern Corps, of course, calls all the comic code hoo-ha. So we did that. So yeah.
I wanted to ask about the Comics Code Authority hoo-ha, as you put it, because that kind of loops back around to what we were talking about, the kind of anti-commercialism of your work. And also a comment you made just a few moments ago about people looking at your work and going, I know there's something wrong with this. I just can't put my finger on it, because the criticism from the Comics Code Authority was just correct me if I'm wrong, they just objected to the art style. It wasn't necessarily the content. They just didn't like how it looked.
Andy Helfer rang me up to tell me this, and I immediately rang Alan Moore, and he said, "Oh, Kevin, I'm so jealous." But it was one of those things which has kind of followed me down the years, where they just didn't know why they didn't like it. They just didn't like it. It was. I was kind of hoping when I got the artwork back, it would be stamped with, refuse, desist, destroy, or something on the back. But sadly, it wasn't. But I do have a copy of the Comics Code now, which was given to me many, many years ago by Archie Goodwin when I was over there. And I mischievously said to Archie, Archie, trouble with Comic Code. Do you actually have a copy of a Comic Code? I mean, a printed copy. And he searched high and low and went around all the different offices, and he finally found one copy of the current Comic Code, and there was a phone number on it. I said, "Oh, has anyone ever actually been to the Comic Code offices?" And he went, "No." I said, "Oh, I'm gonna ring them up and make an appointment as I'm in New York to actually visit them. For it'd be interesting." I assumed in my fancy image of it was just lots of really old Aunt May type women working in an office with some ogre guy saying, "Send some more, send some more." But when I rang up, I said, "Oh, I'm a British artist just visiting New York. I've heard so much about the American Comic Code. I'd like to come and visit you and see how you work and so on." And this woman said, "There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to see here," and slammed the phone down. But I'm not sure it is. I mean, they physically sent the artwork somewhere. It was viewed by people. I've never seen a photo of the interior of their offices. I know it was.
The best way to tip someone off that there's definitely something to see is to insist that there is nothing to see and putting the phone down.
And I think by this point it is largely run by, I think it's always run by John Goldwater of Archie Comics, who are behind the kind of, I mean, it's to their advantage to drive certain rivals out of business, so they deny that to their dying breath, of course. But at least, I mean, in Britain we never had a comics code. We just had this kind of ramshackle sort of management idea of how far things should go. Like Action was obviously allowed to go as far as it wanted until somehow it broke some unwritten rule, and that was the end of it. You know, everything moved on. I moved back.
I'm fascinated by the kind of moral panics of the 20th century. You know, the EC horror comics scare in America, the crime comics scare in the UK, and how that all kind of feeds together into the moment of of Action, and the fact that this is all in America. They decided to head it off by having the Comics Code Authority, but in Britain there was like a pressure valve. They were like, all right, we'll cancel this comic, but actually we'll carry on. We'll just be a bit more careful in the future.
Well, you just reminded me. I fell foul of the only thing that we had, any passing resemblance to the Comic Code, which was the Horror Comic Act of Parliament from the 50s. Barely ever invoked beyond that point. When I was very young, I did a thing called Legend Horror Classics back in the days of poster magazines, and it was a comic strip on one side, a big, gory photo from the Hammer archives on the other, and that was the usual pattern of them. But one of them was apparently held up in Parliament. Why is this filth being sold in our news agents? So that was another glorious moment in the sun for the O'Neill family. So yeah, that was the printer immediately pulled it, and they stopped publishing it. That was the end of it. But yeah, I seem to, I don't know. Actually, I bring out the worst in myself. To be blunt, I just can't help it. It's something. There is something wrong with me, as Alan has said many times.
Coming from Alan, that's a hell of a thing, you know.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it really builds up your confidence as being a normal member of society, doesn't it? I thought I passed among people unnoticed,
Isn't that the whole thing about kind of serial killers and things like they pass amongst looking perfectly normal.
Michael, I knew you were going to say serial killers. It's one. Of course, that's another thing I really want associated with my name and my career. The first thing came in your head, wasn't it? It was Ted Bundy, wasn't it?
Hey, I could have said pervert, but I thought that would be rude.
No, you were being kind. You just said serial killer. I know. It's easily done.
One thing I am intrigued about is how aware your family were of what you were doing in comics. Did they keep up with what was being published of your work? And if so, what did they think of it?
I honestly couldn't tell you that. I did give them books, and my mum would flick through them and go, "Oh, that's nice," or something. They were interested. My dad didn't really understand them. But see, they didn't grow up with comics. Though my mum would sometimes reference really old, Pansy Potter sort of characters from long ago when my brother was young. My dad always said, "Well, he didn't understand what I was doing, but he'd back me all the way. He'd back me all the way," which was all I wanted. My sister's Colleen, the eldest of them, has always been sort of interested. But no, general family, no, I don't know what to say. I mean, the usual thing would be, and my mum would generally start it off, my aunts would follow with have you got plenty of work? Because when I first left, to anybody, I had a really secure job at IPC, job for life in those days. Freelance, self-employed was very close to unemployed in their heads, So as I describe myself as freelance, I mean, freelance sounded much sexier, didn't it? It sounded more like David Bailey or something, Or I know what you're going to say, an assassin, yeah. Well, no, maybe an assassin's okay as well. But no, it was very close to being unemployed. Plus, you're at home all the time, not apparently doing very much. So that's where they worried. They worried about that. But as I was constantly, I was busy, even if I wasn't earning a great deal of money back in the old days. They're very supportive. Very supportive, I'd say, yeah.
On the Green Lantern work that you did with Alan, which was the controversial stuff for the Comics Code Authority, I guess it's one of those titles that there is so much avenue for imagination there. It's basically space cops, and they've got rings that can manifest whatever they want. At the time, were you conscious of just wanting to do something outrageous with this? When you're offered Green Lantern, did you have a sense of, oh, great, something I can get my teeth into, or considered,
Initially the stories I was getting were written by Todd Klein, who was later on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen as a letterer designer. And Todd's stories were great, Insect Trust and the others that we worked on the Spider Guild, and I really loved them. I thought they were just stupid, and they were buried at the back of a book. You could kind of just get on with it, you were carrying the book. But the two-parter with Alan, Tigers, it had a crucifixion in it, didn't it? I don't know why he gave me a crucifixion scene. I mean, you should never, ever, ever, ever do that. And it was all just that everything about it was kind of unsettling. It's unsettling to read. So I thought I had to raise my game a bit, and at least kind of try and match what Alan was doing. But I didn't expect the reaction, the Comic Code reaction, because I don't think there was any reaction at all when it was finally published a year later. Both parts ends up in a Green Lantern core annual. But I gather that the story's been much, harvested for Green Lantern material later on, but that's Alan's stuff. I don't think mine has been used at all. It's just an interesting story. I mean, I must say, I enjoyed the attention. Can't deny it, I did. I liked it. It's good. I just got another rope, really, because the Comic Code didn't last that many years afterwards, did it? It sort of atrophied and withered and died on the vine, really. It was hopeless. It was just hopeless.
It's often the Green Lantern story you do with Alan is often mentioned as one of the nails in its coffin, which is quite the accolade.
But if only I could have visited their offices. I could have had so much fun. It'd be such a much better story, wouldn't it? I wanted to see their rubber stamps, their approved rubber stamps. I knew that can really have been all they had on their desk, approved and disapproved. But
a copy of the code, a copy of the Bible, and a rubber stamp.
Yeah.
That's all you need, really. I mean, talking about it seems like the perfect moment to start talking about martial law, because it's a strip that is, and I've used this phrase already today is filled with this kind of righteous anger against superheroes, and I'm fascinated by the fact that Pat didn't have the grounding in kind of Silver Age American comics that you did. You know, you grew up with this,
right?
And so I'm wondering about how much for you Marshal Law is, you know, righteous anger, pricking the pomposity of these characters, and how much it's you almost like a kid with toys, kind of smashing them into one another, and you know, having fun in the destruction of it.
I think that's a very good description, because I was again leaping off topic. There's a spread I did towards the end of Tempest where Alan said, "I bet you were making the sounds, weren't you, Kevin, that battle scene? You were going," which is almost true. Yeah, I mean, Marshal Law was actually the perfect match for us, really, because say Pat didn't grow up with stuff, so he was completely baffled by names like Green Lantern and things like that. Whereas I'd grown up with them, but I'd also grown up with the Harvey Kurtzman stuff and Super Duper Man again, which is like the ground zero for a lot of comic people. So you could like. So for me, you could like them and take the piss out of them, and that was that seemed to be perfectly okay, because they were ludicrous, many of them, you know, actually most of them. And it gave me one-stop shopping for putting all the characters in, all the Human Torches and Spider-Man and whatever else we wanted to do, Captain America's, all in one place, and never have to worry about really drawing the real characters ever again. Plus, we did it our own way, and we had a terrific editor or kind of group editor was Archie Goodwin, you know, best of the best, and Dan Chichester was a regular editor, and they were completely behind us on it. And on the initial 6-issue series and a one shot. And it was just a lot of fun. We had like Nemesis. We were just laughing our asses off, really, at the Public Spirit and the Sleep Man and that stuff. It was good fun, and it was right on top of Dark Knight and Watchmen, which created the atmosphere for us to do it. You know, I don't think it would have happened before them. I don't think it would have sold to Marvel before them, those books. But our timing was right. I say our timing is right. I actually did warn us when you said yes to a series that we wouldn't be able to start it for a year, because that's how long Marvel took to prepare contracts, and he was absolutely right. So it was actually delayed a year. He couldn't employ us for a year, shall we say? So we couldn't draw anything for that time. It was good fun. It was late, you know. I picked up the theme here, Michael. You know, it was late, and it did have a bigger following in Britain than America. It sold more over here than in America. That was a pattern that was happening with a lot of books, with Swamp Thing initially, and I think DC and Marvel were surprised that sales books were going up over here because of the British creators. You know, who kind of had their own following anyway, I guess.
One thing that really strikes me about, you know, even though the initial Marshal Law stories, is the sheer amount of kind of slogan graffiti you put on everything. Now, this was something you'd always done. You'd done it on Nemesis, but it kind of took on almost pathological proportions by the time you get to Marshall. You know, every surface has a slogan on it. And I'm really interested about this because I was reading recently about the rise of graffiti art and you know, the importation of the American subculture to Britain, but how Britain had its own subculture before then, which was protest graffiti. that you can trace back to, if you want to, the situationists of the 1960s in France, but British graffiti always seemed to have it wasn't art, it was slogans. It was like there was that famous was it "A Clapton is God" that got written around London.
Oh yes,
yeah. And the Fiat advert that said, it was like a woman had replied saying, if this car was a woman, she'd run you over. That kind of thing. It was always aggressive. It had a political content. So I'm just wondering where this penchant for putting these little slogans and everything came on. Whether it's something that you picked up from your environment, or whether it was just lots of little in jokes that you liked inserting in there.
Well, it's another layer of story. Now, I tell you, it's got its origins slightly, or heavily into Bill Elder's work for Mad, which is full of slogans and asides and things. And Texay's cartoons would occasionally stop and have something written on a wall or whatever. But I have to say, because Pat Mills and I shared the same sort of overlap in a background working on Whizzer and Chips and things like that, the alliterative, crappy top lines and things, your mind can't help but make up, sort of, how can I put it, more adult versions of those. You think in terms of wordplay, and I started putting stuff in, and you do always wonder, I hope I'm not treading on the writer's toes. You don't want to do that. But Pat liked it, so I just kept putting more and more in. The more he laughed, I thought, that's fine. We keep doing it. Then you find it's the reader expects it. It's part of the world. But I was aware of our American graffiti is an art form. And you notice here, Marshal Law it's not tagged in that way. It is more British because it is slogans. You're absolutely right. Probably the first person to mention that, really. Because tags, they're almost incomprehensible to anyone outside of an area. Yeah. But they are beautiful. Whereas the Marshal Law stuff is blunt. It's just it's a blunt instrument. It suited that world. But it's one of the early kind of defining things. It made Marshal Law sort of different to just because almost immediately there was interest from film people. But over the years, the interest has gradually diminished. There was to be more to make superhero movies, the less they're interested in Marshal Law. At the beginning, it was no one can make this movie because no one understands who the Human Torch is or anything. Now everyone understands who he is, but no one wants to go as far as Marshal Law. Completely forgotten what I was going to say now. I have to pick up the phrase, I think I was off on a rant, it's about I know. The frustrating thing about Marshal Law movies, from the earliest days to the very end, when Joseph McGee was interested in making a film of it, was they wanted to remove the superheroes completely, and Marshal Law sort of more or less describes non-costumed. It's just a guy with two guns. And frankly, you can come up with your own guy with two guns. If you take away the superhero, the satire, and the costumes and things, there's really no point in doing it. It was crazy, but there were one or two people along the way who wanted to make a decent film. I would have thought Rob Bottin, the great effects guy, was going to be his first directorial picture, but that never happens. That's a shame if it didn't happen, really, Michael. I don't know if you would stop me now. Yeah, I did learn very, very, very early on with films. Most of them never happen. It's a very odd business to be in. You could spend your whole career working on films that never happen, and come out the other end with no films ever having happened, but made a perfectly decent living, I would imagine.
I do know somebody who's works on scripts in LA, just to, they come across his desk just to polish them up, and he has a very proud track record that nothing he's worked on has ever been made. So he's absolutely nothing to show for it whatsoever.
Yes, yeah, it's a weird kind of parallel world to comics, but at least in comics comics are cheap and cheerful when they do get made, and they can look spectacular, involving not hundreds of CGI artists and a monumental number of executive producers and so on. That's the beauty of comics, really, isn't it? Economically they can be put together. I think that's probably a constant.
One of the things I'm interested with in Marshal Law is the fact that you started off at Epic, which was Marvel Comics' imprint, and you did the one shot Marshal Law Takes Manhattan, but with all the superheroes having to be slightly oblique versions of Marvel superheroes. But then you decided to take the character from Epic to Apocalypse Comics, and from there to Toxic. Now, I didn't want to talk about Toxic because as a kind of 12, 13-year-old, it was quite the comic to discover, and exactly the kind of mind-blowing experience that you kind of want when you're a kid. But I just wanted to get the sense of how you felt about having to move this character around, whether Marvel had been a bit of a straitjacket, and taking it to somewhere like Apocalypse and then on to Toxic allowed you to just do more of what you wanted.
Yeah, I think there's more of that. Memory's a bit hazy on this. I'm not sure if Archie was leaving company or there was interference, the usual stuff. The switch to Apocalypse was I did a cover, Marshal Law cover for Fantasy Advertiser, fanzine, which apparently sold really well. And Jeff Fry, who was running it ends up running Toxic, the Apocalypse sort of set up. I think it was Neptune. Some bloody different names. He took note of that and approached us, and he noted that we actually owned Marshal Law, and he just offered us money to do Marshal Law for his new venture, which was actually a bit of a risk. You're putting out a huge publisher like Marvel to take a fly into the unknown, but we actually kind of liked the idea of working for a British publisher. Seemed a worthwhile thing to do. Little knowing the pain that would follow, I suppose. So yeah, Marshal Law was going to appear in God knows what we were thinking, really. And my output, a weekly. I mean, it's one of those things that like many things over the years I've encountered, really, whether I've been involved directly or just heard about, where the creators want to do a monthly, or even a bi-monthly, and that would be great, but it suddenly becomes a weekly, and it's just unsustainable. You just can't keep up with the need for material. So Jeff Fry's dream was to do a full-colour weekly. The warning bells should have gone off, but we stuck with it, and it was an odd consortium. You had a lot of different disparate personalities working on it, all of whom owned their individual strips. And it proved anything. It proves it's bloody difficult to do a weekly comic where everybody owns their individual strips and can pull them at any minute for whatever reason, and you haven't got any stock to fall back on to drop in like you would have had on Valiant and things like that. It's a nightmare. The whole thing turned into a nightmare of payment problems and I don't know, personality clashes, to say the least, friendships falling apart. But I'm glad you got something out of it, Michael. Is a completely mentally scarred 13-year-old. You know.
Hey, discovering a comic book strip called Sex Warrior when you're 13 years old is.
I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure it ticks all the boxes.
We'll leave it at that. But what I'm fascinated by is that you did the kind of design for Toxic, all the mastheads and things like that, and it felt very much like a reaction against something. I read an interview with you where you said you got a bit bored of the kind of earnestness of things like Crisis that were around and Deadline that were around at the time, and you wanted to do something that was quite aggressive.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely true. And it started with I think up in Scotland, me and McMahon were at a convention, and we saw a publication called Psychotronic Video, which was just a review of what you'd call really sort of terrible under the radar films, lots of zombie films and that. But it's very funny. The reviews are very, very funny, and that's really why there's zombies in that Marshal Law story. So yeah, zombies. This is in the days before zombies were cool. They were just interesting if you were a bit of a nutter. So there was that. But yeah, I did. I detested Crisis. I just didn't like its earnestness. I didn't like its sort of sixth form polemic, and didn't like being lectured. And but and I'm not sure everyone agreed with the angle we talk about. So I don't think anyone else was amused by burning down rainforests in those days, except me. I think I was definitely alone now, but it was actually a joke. All these things were jokes, but there were people who took it more seriously. But it I don't know. It's give the comic an identity, a kind of a bolshy identity, because Crisis wasn't the only thing at the time. Being kind of look at the suffering, and suffer yourself. It's, but the reason, I don't know. I have to think anyone knows the full story of Toxic, because there's obviously a big behind the scenes micromanagement, or not micromanagement, tiny management sort of story, which we didn't get to hear. We just knew that if people start getting paid late and they think you're running it, then they're chasing you. Yeah. That's how it happens, and it just fell apart. But I know I know 2000 AD were worried about it, and we could easily have done a knockoff of 2000 AD with the people we had, but we didn't want to do that. So we really had nothing to worry about, and to do something different. But I think it bumped the rates up on 2000 AD when Toxic happened. I think some people who can put it work for both did probably well out of it. But yeah, I don't regret it. It was fun. It's fun doing Marshal Law, and we ended up having to continue the story at Dark Horse. So and later their creditors, I said when they said they were interested in law, I said, we've got this story, we've got the second half to do, and they said, yeah, fine, just do it. So we just continued there, and just decided. Really decided early on that Marshall was a complete tart, and he'll work for any publisher. It's in his nature,
Wait, just thinking about the nature of Marshal Law, the nature of Toxic. You've mentioned multiple times the influence of Mad magazine on you, and that, I think that was the moment that really shone through. That kind of anarchic, mad, for want of a better phrase, madness of just throwing stuff around because it's funny. It can be satirical, it can be juvenile, it can be ridiculous, but it's all about glorying in it in the moment. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. And we didn't. There was no point on Toxic where anyone ever said you can't do that. There was nothing. It was completely liberating. But from very early on, it was obvious it wasn't going to hold together. Like I said, the personalities weren't holding together. Arguments about who was in charge. I don't know. It was. But I don't regard it as it wasn't a completely miserable experience either. It was it's something that had to be done, and it was a mad thing to do. And I'm glad I was part of the madness. Really, again, it just suited. It suited me to be part of the madness. I can remember Jeff Fry offering me and Pat the royalties from Kingdom of the Blind. We did that at Marshal Law book. It was a very, very good Marshal Law book. There's a one-shot, the prelude to Toxic, and it had for Toxic in the back. And he offered us the royalties kind of early for that, because he knew there was sort of disquiet and murmurings and things. And we turned them back because we knew that if we got the royalties, maybe other people might have had payments delayed. And this is perhaps the only Christian thing I've ever done in my life, Michael. But we actually never got those royalties. We could have had them then, but yes, they were turned back. I'm not sure if they went where we wanted them to go, but anyway, it was quite decent, honest. But we still got a lot of stick from people who thought we somehow were, I don't know, more management than creators on it. But someone had to edit it. Pat took it upon himself to edit it, and I edited it and I can ill afford the time, but I had a sort of an idea of how it should look, and we did that. But I think it's I haven't looked at them for years, unless you want to tell me different. My recollection is it was fairly decent. It was lively.
Because it was exactly that kind of anarchic feel that perhaps I was only getting into 2000 AD at the same time as well. Excuse me. It was perhaps a flavor of action that 2000 AD to a certain extent had maybe lost a little bit by that point. And as I said, as a young teen, it was exactly the kind of thing that I wanted to be reading, but not knowing all the stuff, not knowing most of the names in it. It came to me completely without context. So when Mutomaniac stops appearing, I don't know why. The thing that Mick did. And when it disappears off the shelves, I don't know why that happens either. You could, in the days before the internet, you were kind of completely cut off from this stuff.
Well, I don't know why Mr. Maniac stopped appearing. I remember it appeared on a cover, but not on the inside. And but yeah, and then things were disintegrating fairly swiftly. I thought we carried the work of Jeremy Banks, the cartoonist. He was very good. And I think a number of people got their earliest work in Toxic. Yeah, it just didn't last. It needed a good couple of years to really get rolling. It didn't have that. But apart from all the misery, the suffering, people not being paid, and people falling out and never speaking again, it was a great experience. And one that I would happily repeat.
During the course of the 90s, you had Marshal Law on it. It wasn't until the late 90s that you started working with Alan on League. What was that period like for you? What were you working on at the time that you can recall now as kind of standing out?
Well, let's see. I was doing Lobo stories with Alan Grant and Keith Giffen. I did a few Lobo issues for DC. I thought a really nice story for Negative Burn. That was trying to remember which issue it was. It was written by a lady called Edith Beltane. The Abyss Also Grasps. That was what it's called. A 10-page story. I did that. That was in a different style. Oh, I did work for Penthouse Comics. Which I'm sure your 13-year-old self would have loved, but the older by then, and I don't know if you're a subscriber to Penthouse magazine or anything, but
on the basis that this may well get back to my parents, I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
All right. So I did quite a few Penthouse comics, and one of them was censored. Was it banned? I can't remember. One or the other. It was printed in Canada, and it couldn't be carried over the border into North America because it was considered pornography. Because the lead character she's turned into a dog and ends up in a dog pound. I'll leave that with you. I'll just leave that with you. It's but anyway, that was a problem. I did Death Race 2000 for Roger Corman's comics. I think that was Pat and Tony Skinner. Some stuff for Black Ball, which was Dave Elliott, and it was Dave Elliott brought me into Penthouse Comics, and he did a thing called Black Ball with Keith Giffen. Did a strip called John Payne. I've still got an unpublished episode of that collapsed. It was an odd time as well for comics because things were kind of going bust in America. You remember that kind of distributors were falling apart and comic stores were buckling, and there's a great boom in trading cards which fell apart. So it's all very odd. Finally did a Bizarro story for Adventure Comics annual, but not with Alan. Called Scattered Among All This, there's lots of different film projects I worked on, none of which were made. Right, so okay. We'll just draw a veil over those. They're an almost entirely separate conversation, I sort of worked with Jerry Anderson for a while, and Michael Wadley, and different people. What else did I do? I pretty much bring things up to date. Oh, and Batmite I did. That was with Alan Grant. But
that's one of the things I very much wanted to ask about, because Batmite is one of those little kind of Silver Age characters that,
right,
on the I guess on the face of it, you wouldn't think deserved an update. you and Alan come along, and he's gone from being like this very silly character to actually being quite malevolently vindictive, I thought.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, that was what fun. We did two of them, and we did two of them. They were both enjoyable. Both for Archie Goodwin, although Denny O'Neil wouldn't let me do Batman. So there's very little Batman in them because Denny O'Neil actually didn't like me. I've never understood why, because I'm a lovely chap, apart from being a psychopathic serial killer in some people's minds, So, but yeah, so there's very little Batman in there. But yeah, Batman was fun. Alan was good fun to work with. I mean, and also occasionally in tandem with Keith Giffen. Yeah, we did some interesting, but it was an odd period because I was doing Marshal Law. Pat was doing a lot of stuff for France, and we couldn't find a publisher for Marshal Law. So it was appearing in the kind of. I mean, most people haven't seen the Savage Dragon crossover that ran in black and white. That was in the dog days of things falling apart. Eric Larson rather kindly found us a home there and let us use the Savage Dragon, and that was a pretty spectacular one. This all leads up to League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Why I was available to do it, really, because if I'd been doing Marshal Law, Fallon had rung me up. I think even before hearing about it, I said, "Well, I'm with Marshal Law for 2 or 3 years, and it would have gone elsewhere. It would have been a great shame." So I don't know if you're ready for Marshal for League of Extraordinary Gentlemen.
Absolutely. Let's let's grasp this particular nettle. How? I mean, on the very basic level, how did you come to be working on League of Extraordinary Gentlemen with Alan? I guess.
Okay, now this is actually does involve 2000 AD in an old kind of way.
Yeah.
I went into a comic showcase in London. Paul Hudson, the owner, said to me, "Oh, I hear you're working on a new project with Alan Moore." And I said, No, I'm not. But I'm speaking to Alan later because we'd all been sent these contracts, these sort of, we own everything, you get nothing, sign it or else contracts from whoever owned 2000 AD at the time. And I rang Alan and said, well, I knew he wouldn't be signing it, I'm pretty certain. But I said, no, as far as I'm aware, nobody's signing these. As I rang Alan, we're having a chat, and I didn't mention what Paul Hudson had said, but just as we were closing the conversation, Alan said, "Oh, Kevin, I don't know if you'd be interested, but I've got this idea." And then he ran the idea of League past me, and I thought, that is the best thing I've ever heard. It's brilliant. And so I said, "Yeah, you count me in." And the only thing written at the time, there was no script. Because Alan writes for the artists he's working with, that was the general way. So he sent me a 2-page outline. I think it was only 2 pages, maybe 2.5, something like that. Very short, very beautiful. But that became the basis, really, of a movie, because it has Dorian Gray mentioned in it,
right,
who we never used. So they were working from just this raw outline. So they for 2 streams, going different directions. He told me at the time of his movie interest in this, and of course my experience in movies was, well, it will never happen because they never do, So sort of ignoring that, I started we had long conversations. We started talking about Nemo, the Invisible Man, how we'd do them, how we'd handle them, different thoughts on the Nautilus, and I started submitting sketches. And the early ones did have Victorian graffiti, which Alan told me to remove because he actually didn't like that. So, and I could see what I mean. I sort of snuck them back in, or snuck graffiti back in later, And if he'd said take it out, I'd have taken it out. But some stuff sneaks about. I could see it just wasn't his style, you know. It's and then I think we can cover the 20 years fairly quickly on this, because we just worked, you know, in harmony from the beginning to end, which is very, very unusual. There was no falling out. The only problems we ever had were, well, with DC. Nobody else. A little bit of trouble later on 1910. But that wasn't us. And it just kind of clicked. I mean, I was really ready to work on something like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It slowed me down, made me concentrate on human characters. I think Pat May was rather unkindly once described it as my kind of girls' comic phase or something, you know. Because presumably because of Mina and the emphasis on her. But you know, I absolutely loved it, and I love the way it evolved over time as well. You know, it's which is often counter to what the reader would expect or are used to. You know, people do tend to like the same team having the same, well, similar adventures and the kind of constancy. I could see why. I mean, it really wasn't designed to initially, I think, to live beyond the first two volumes, which were really one big volume. First two volumes. Aaron told me he was taking a break after the second volume. He just needed a break. I made some pitiful sound of, I'll go down to a labour exchange and press my nose against the window and see what they've got, Aaron. You know. And he said that image, when he rang me a couple of days later, so upset him. But he thought, why don't we do a source book? And then we instantly both agreed that source books are really boring, you know, they just are. And that evolved into the Black Dossier, where the two prime characters are reading the book that they're being pursued for. So it just went off on a tangent, almost completely by chance, really. And the book was successful when it came out, but not liked by reviewers, or the I should add. But it seems to be much more popular now. It's kind of percolated through the system, and sort of people got used to the idea of its form. And again, I could see the legacy of Mad Magazine, because we try to make the little features in between the comic strip as realistic as possible. And it is funny. There are funny moments. There's Billy Bunton, there's Fanny Hill, and you know, there's a lot going on. But when we moved to Century, I'm there. Alan rang me up and said, 1910. He said, "I'd like to do it." He said with some trepidation, "I'd like to do it as a musical." I said, "Yeah, fine." Because I thought there'd be a big dance number at the end. You know, there's only a small dance number at the end, and I've always wanted to do a big dance number. You know, we never had the space. You know, and that was good fun. The only one that confounded me really was the middle part of Century, 1969, which is getting very close to home, and it took longer to draw than any other page for page than any other League project. And it's the one that kind of constantly bothers me that I didn't do a good enough job on it. I think the final one is good. I think the Mary Poppins, if you want to call it that, sequence, it's some of the best stuff I've done. Yeah, I think it's all cool. And it was a great team from beginning to end as well. At League, we had Ben DeMagmalou, who coloured the book. Apart from any pages I coloured, it's full colour myself. Ben coloured all of it. He's brilliant. Bill Oakley coloured, lettered the book right through to the first 15 pages of Black Dossier, and then sadly passed away. Todd Klein picked up and lettered all the rest. All the design pages for typesetting. That's all Todd. Yeah, we had a great team in it. We carried the team right through to the end. You know, could see it concluded the way we wanted to see it concluded, and that's it, done and dusted.
It's one of those projects where, as you say, you know, you had the same team when it's throughout, but you can, rereading it now, you get a real sense of an evolving collaboration. You know, it's interesting to hear that, you know, how harmonious it was all the way through. Do you and Alan just have similar personalities? Is this, you know, the source of this? Because you know, knowing Alan, having talked to Alan, he draws on a lot of the same things that, you know, you've mentioned over the course of our chat. You know, the influences on you. Is it just that you're coming from the same place on this stuff?
I think that's very true. Born the same year, very similar working class backgrounds. I've had totally different paths to where we got to when we met. Yeah, it's just it's just a kind of perfect partnership. You just sort of wonder when you hear of things falling apart with other people. You can't quite understand how. I don't understand how people can fall out with Alan. No, because he's incredibly easygoing. He's a real gentleman, you know. But I think any evidence I've seen where he does get furious is when he's let down by people. If someone gives their word, like he gives his word, he expects it to have the same value. Do you know what I mean? And I know it's more publishers' way to, oh, well, I didn't keep my word, here's more money. But that doesn't work. It might work on some people, but it doesn't work with Alan. And God forbid anyone rings him up and offers him a film deal, you know, because he's been in those, you know, the whitewater rapids of Shit Creek many times with, in his early days with film people, and he knows what it's like. You know, it's a hungry machine, and it's disrespectful. The film business, you know, and comics gradually to be blunt, become more like that. I'm talking more about American comics, but yeah, it's disrespectful. Yeah, or can be not nice. And you know, like Aaron, I'm talking about American comics as if I actually read them, but as I don't, you know, I'm just speculating.
Well, I wonder if that's one of the charms, one of the reasons for the success of the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is because it's not, although it is delving into the history of literature, you know, and has all these different references. It's not necessarily self-reverential about comics. You know, comics isn't really there as a dominating idea, as a dominating influence. You know, it's drawing on such a wider pool of influences.
Yeah, I think that's well observed, and yeah, when I'm saying, I'm just talking about American comics, I'm aware of it. I'm saying American comics as if I mean American comics, all comics. I'm really saying American superhero comics, which dominate, and they dominate films as well, don't they? Now, there's actually more going on in the world, you know, and you know, I know it really, really annoys younger people to go on about growing up in the 50s and 60s. But if you did grow up in the 50s and 60s, you actually can't help about it, talk about it, because it was an incredible overlap of different creative interests and disciplines, and in a way it's unimaginable now, because when you can't imagine someone as famous as Paul McCartney going into a bookshop and painting the walls and hanging up shelves and things for an alternate bookshop, it just really wouldn't happen, It's so. Yeah, I don't know where we're going with this, other than the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen has many cross influences from all sorts of things, and once we decided, because it wasn't built into quite so solid at the very beginning, how big the crossover was going to be with all kinds of things. Once we realised that actually every time we showed a newspaper or background character, it could be someone from fiction. Then it became something else, and then you start getting the criticisms of it's a Where's Wally book or something like that, and that was like, because we always made it so you could follow the story without recognising stuff. You recognise the stuff fine, but when I see the people, buy Jess Nevin's book and read the comic alongside the Jess Nevin's references, it wasn't really intended to be done like that, Otherwise, it ended up like a kind of one of those American comics with endless captions about referencing some golden age comic that no one's got a copy of,
Well, I think it's one of those things that I always loved those captions, even if I didn't know what the comic was, just because it gave the impression of a backstory that may not even necessarily be there. And that's one of the things I like about League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is that even if you don't get the reference, it gives the sense of it feeling deeper.
Sure, yeah.
There's an oblique reference to something. You go, I bet that's interesting. Anyway, I'm going to carry on reading this comic book, kind of thing,
Well, it's good fun. It's like a kind of it literally was a day out for me. Sometimes I almost got drowned down at Putney trying to get a reference picture of Putney Bridge, because I went wading in to get a better view, and completely forgetting, of course, the suction. I was watching a skiff go by and thinking, "Oh fuck, I'm going to drown! I'm going to drown here." Managed to drag myself and my shoes mercifully out in time, but I had odd experiences on League reference trips. I went to Woking to find the Martian sand pits that H.G. Wells mentions, which are there, and I went into this sort of Dickensian pub, and I said, "Oh, I can't find." I couldn't find them, and they said, "Oh, yeah, just go there." And I said, "Let's walk down the side of that house." I said, "That's private property." And they said, "Oh, they won't mind. No, don't just go there and climb up here." And it's the very early days of mobile phones, and one of the very drunk and very charming people in there said, "Yeah, take my phone and give the pub a ring if you get lost." And and everyone was terribly helpful. It was lovely, So I've got me pictures of Martian sand pits, and couldn't really use them. They weren't quite what it wasn't what I expected from the book. It sounds much bigger and grander, but at least I've been there, trod the ground, and done the work, and I've gone through the whole bloody book, working out how many cylinders fell and how many tripods they contained, and an odd detail about them they carried a sort of humanoid cargo, which the Martians were feeding on like vampires. We didn't use that. I think it's a case of finding room, I suppose. But yeah, a lot of thought went into League, and it continued as, and we just kept our hardcore readers really, because I think once you lose the initial character, the earliest group, the people who kind of drifted in from like all the Justice League side first lost interest.
Yeah,
that's what I'm guessing. And we were left with our core kind of readers who've been through thick and thin, and the long waits in between issues and stuff like that. No, it's been a fun ride. League, a perfect end to a kind of comic career as well. Tempest, it was. I think Alan deliberately did it that way. When I said I could only manage one more book, it did feel like it was nicely tailored for both of us as a sign off. But I haven't retired. I have to keep. I have not retired. Not doing League anymore. It doesn't mean I've retired. Most people don't do League, and they haven't retired.
One thing I really want to ask about, and this kind of runs through your career, particularly when you get to the 1960s in League, and even when you're doing the Victorian stuff. And don't take this the wrong way. You do seediness very well.
Yeah.
And you reminded me earlier about working on Penthouse Comics, but there's there is that kind of element in your work of that kind of like 1950s, 1960s, kind of a decaying seediness that I particularly associate with programs like the Sweeney, the post-industrial seediness of London. I wondered if that was something that was consciously there for you, the kind of Paul Raymond London, if you will.
Yeah, well, I mean, when I was a kid, going down to Woolwich, which isn't that far away, a few miles away, it looked like the Limehouse that Sax Roma described. It was really old and fading, fascinating, vibrant, full of people. Nothing like it is today, where ripped the heart out of the place. But yeah, they're all Woolwich Arsenal, and down near the docks. I did a ferry point actually. You had all these weird tattoo parlours, crumbling buildings, and of course, the whole area of London had been really bombed heavily. So you had bomb sites you could play on. I loved all that. I actually loved all that. And I think one thing I know probably would disagree on, though it doesn't really come up in the work we've done, is symmetry. I love the asymmetrical, and I don't even like being in a symmetrical world, like a piazza in Italy or somewhere. I find it really disturbing. Everything balanced up on either side. But I love asymmetrical, kind of quirky buildings and topsy-turvy buildings and stuff like that. Things that are falling apart. Grand old houses that are crumbling. Can't stand the way they treat monuments like Stonehenge. They kind of keep it looking like somebody's planted some old stones, Sarsen stones on a middle-class front lawn. I like pictures of things when they were overgrown, old buildings that are overgrown and stuff. Yes, I've carried on. I do like a certain amount of decadence. And I've had old Soho that I remember when I was young and just starting work. That was really, really sleazy. It was, and you did see some characters. I must say, you did see some characters. It was quite something. And of course, Dark They Were and Golden Eyed moved to Berwick Street, so you're near the IT offices and all the International Times offices and the kind of actually guys in Packamax as well. Looking for action. There was. There was all of that going on. So yeah, I'm glad you noticed that in my work. It's much better than being thought of as a serial killer, I suppose.
I'm going to regret saying that, aren't I? Oh man, right. Wait, because it for me it kind of plugs into all, all the like the Victorian advertisements that you include and things like that. It's for me that has a kind of link to the graffiti and the stuff that you put on walls.
Oh yeah.
And it just there's such a fundamental element of graphic design to your work that you seem to feel like, I don't know, everything's a canvas, even when it's just like a fairly standard background,
Well, I love the way the early Victorian advertising was completely unregulated. So stuff on, I mean, there were even punch cartoons bemoaning the state of the streets with the amount of billboards and advertising, because they just stuck posters everywhere, all over the place. It did look fantastic. I could see how it would annoy people, but it looked absolutely incredible. And I like that. I like all the texture, all the because that is what I loved about Mad. I love the fact that you go back and read an issue 2 or 3 times, especially Bill Elder's work or Wally Wood's, and find stuff you hadn't seen before. It made it all very rewarding, and even not understanding all the jokes or even the language, not knowing it was there's a lot of Jewish humour in Mad magazine, and only picking up on that years later. But as a kid, you think, oh, these are just strange and interesting words. It's just it's kind of fascinating, and it's a window into America, which you had no hope when you were a kid of ever physically visiting. So this was as close as you were going to get.
I mean, that's fascinating because, coming back to my first question of this part of the interview, about that notion of outsider, being an outsider, dealing with language and images that are not yours but a part of the kind of milieu that you find around you, and distilling them and subverting them and turning them into something else, quite often that is the opposite of what they were originally intended. And it particularly the stuff with League, it's a postmodern comic book in that it borrows, it elevates, it subverts, it takes things and messes them around, and I can't help but look back at your career as somebody who was copying and was cutting out and pasting up logos and credit boxes and everything, and seeing that as a through line of your career. And I wondered what your thoughts on that were, and whether you see...
No, I think you're... Yeah, I say you're absolutely right, because putting the snow on logos at Christmas and doing all those jobs, it did make you really think about comics and how they're purposed, and cutting up and stripping in logos, and I don't know, continuing cross-hatching from where an artist had left too much room for a balloon, so you had quite a bit to fill in, and there's a lot you soak up. Also, when I was very young at IPC, if there's absolutely nothing else they could give me to do, they just give me bound volumes to read. So how great was that? Could read old bound volumes of Knockout, original Knockout, read Sinbad Sims, and all his other strips, and marvel at how great things were in the past. Things I was kind of barely aware of, Lord Jumble Sale Annuals and stuff like that, Thunderbolt Jacks and those characters. So I've always kind of lived with one foot, it's almost like 2 feet in the past. I found films more interesting looking back. As a kid, I was always interested in silent pictures, old cartoons. It's pretty. That's been a pretty much a constant thing,
With League, I mean, how much were you aware of, involved with the various issues over publishers and the kind of things like the controversy about the advert for the Marvel douche and the pulping of the issues? Are these things that are things that you've reported to you, or are you involved with Alan in making decisions about?
Well, the Marvel, the absolutely authentic, very real Victorian Advert Marvel douche, I chose and put it in, sent it to Alan. The paste up went to Scott Dombier. Some time passes, and it's printed, and that's all fine. We get copies, and then suddenly it's been pulped. And I think me and Alan, we were just kind of slightly aghast at, well, it was seen as an attack on Marvel, which actually it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was just you're so steeped in the Victorian world that things being a marvel, it's a common enough word. It wasn't actually meant as it had no purpose. The purpose was perhaps just seen by Paul Evans. There's nothing we could do about it. They were printing the issue again. It changed. It did start. It did start what was a kind of happy time with Wildstorm. A suspicion of what was going to happen when DC took over. Alan trying to ring fence himself from any DC interference to, pulping an issue is interference, and what's next? And Black Dossier, of course, got a huge amount of sudden attention.
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, it seemed. They just panicked. Panic button went off, and suddenly every page was being minutely scrutinized. But it ended up being published as it was intended. Billy Bunce's name. It was just very, very odd. There were things that were kind of straightforward. They worried about things that seemed needless to worry about. Using the London Tube map as a credit page, which I'd done. I mean, I think we're living in a time of fear about a fear of other intellectual property when something becomes part of everyday life.
Yeah.
So if you can't go out and photograph, if you're making a film and you can't, film lampposts because they belong to a designer, then and all the street furniture suddenly belongs to someone. It makes life very, very difficult, doesn't it? And sort of Disney hanging on to copyright for longer and longer and longer, so hanging on to Mickey Mouse for longer and longer and longer, does disservice to everybody. Really, it's just kind of ugly. Things need to enter public domain. Will enter public domain. It's just some nature of it, isn't it?
I'm interested about your views on things like copyright and royalties, because you mentioned earlier about when Titan were bringing out volumes of your of the stuff, and you were getting covers, but there wasn't any royalties on those books. Looking back now, what's your feelings about having worked as effectively a commercial artist for decades, where the vast majority of your stuff, aside from Marshal Law and League, has been and still is owned by other people? How do you feel about that in hindsight?
Hindsight's wrong. I mean, it's almost the wrong end of a telescope, because you're only going to make yourself very, very miserable. But I'd be more miserable if I'd been Siegel and Schuster. So, losing Superman for $130 or something is much, much worse. I mean, I never expected drawing Nemesis the Warlock for it still to be printed today. I mean, just didn't. Maybe printed once, and that would be it. That was the kind of norm. Titan Books made it obvious there's money in it, Because you might say there isn't, but when you've done more than, I don't know, at the time we were grumbling, 20 books had come out. That's an awful lot of books done. I don't know what for. I don't know, sort of a nice gesture for for posterity or something. I don't know. I mean, I try not to. I mean, we've talked about nothing but past here, really, haven't we? But I try not to dwell on it because I can't get angry about it. It's just the way things were done. And of course, it was signing away your rights on the back of a check. There was no, the paper trail is extremely odd. When I briefly did stuff for Tornado, did Captain Clapp on the back of Tornado, they were running Chris Loder's Sexton Blake story with Mike Dory. It was meant to be Sexton Blake, and suddenly through some, I mean, in every respect, they should have owned it. IPC had absorbed Amalgamated Press. It was part of one big thing, but because of some television deal in the 60s, they thought they might not own it, so just changed the name to Victor Drago. I think it was changed to. Chris understandably left the strip. I think you're reprinting it, actually. I think Rebellion are reprinting those old strips.
In a special last year, alongside some new stuff as well. So yeah, it's
right.
It's seen the light of day.
But it becomes. I mean, there's also there was Dan Dare is one of those things now held completely separate to IPC at one point, probably separate to Rebellion.
Yes.
Now, it's got a kind of odd consortium around it. So, but we signed the backs of checks, but I actually refuse to sign anything else. I don't. I mean, you don't. You don't lose a game of cards and then sit down at the table with the same hand and say, "Well, I'll put everything on this." I've kind of had enough of signing away rights. I don't sign anything. I just I do things with the understanding. I know some strips are owned. It would appear by someone else, and but generally I don't do other people's strips. It's very rare for me to do that.
Because I'm reminded about the Hardware film that came out in, I think, 1980, where there was a court case, because it was quite clearly based on yours and Steve. It was Steve McManus's Shock story, and I think I read it in To a Power Overload. That there was a payout, and Robert Maxwell got most of it.
Yes, yeah, I know I got very little. I got very little of it. I've never seen a copy with, me and Steve getting credit on it. Me and Steve, I think, was treated even differently. We weren't even on the same sign off for it. I got a very strange phone call from a Daily Mirror lawyer who it was along the lines of, if you don't sign off on this, someone will be suing you. And I thought, I was trying to figure out who on earth would be suing me and why, because I've got an annual story, and the kind of origin of that is just it wouldn't even have been Shock. I mean, Steve asked me to do a Walter the Robot story for the Judge Dredd annual. That's what he asked for, and it was story and art, and I sort of absolutely hated Walter the Robot and didn't want to do that. I'd do something else. So I did this, came up with an idea, ran it by Steve, drew it, tape recorded notes, which is unusual. I think that's the only time I've ever done that. I made a tape recording of my notes. I didn't have time to write them down. Gave that to Steve and said, "Oh, maybe Pat could write this." And Steve said, "No, he'd do it." that's kind of what I recall of Shock. It was just having a bit of fun with it. I did, and I didn't know about Hardware until Time Out had a review of it and pointed out it was rather similar to. So I wrote a letter to Time Out that was published the following week, and then there was a bit of flurry of activity. Steve rang me up and said, "Oh, old matey, you can. There's a, in Soho next week or something." So I went along and saw it. I could see the similarities, but didn't really think much of it until I got this weird phone call from a lawyer. Eventually I just signed it, got some sort of small payment, and forgot all about it. But it crops up periodically because it's sort of linked. It's linked to 2000 AD, even though it's not officially a 2000 AD film. Is it? And Richard Stanley, of course, is a fascinating character. I almost met him in Dublin. I say almost. He kind of sauntered by, wearing a strange hat and a strange look on his face, and he looked like a man who didn't want to be troubled. Shall we say? So I was going to say hello and say, "Oh, by the way, I drew that story Shock," and I thought, well, he might, I don't know, shoot me or something, because he always denied he'd ever seen it, and he was the writer director, wasn't he? But then it is quite possible he didn't. It is quite possible he didn't see it. You do get very odd coincidences in the creative world, things happening at the same time. Just I don't know. Just I found the whole experience odd, but then, like I say, film experience is another day, Michael. Because I feel the lure of a cup of coffee now.
I was just about to wrap
I think I'm gasping.
I was just about to wrap up because I've imposed upon you for far too long. But you mentioned a moment ago that the hindsight can often be the wrong end of the telescope. But so much of what we've talked about, you seem to be genuinely pleased with how things turned out. There doesn't seem to be any hint of, I don't want to say bitterness, but there doesn't seem to be much of a cloud to the silver lining, if you see what I mean. Is that accurate? Are you much more kind of focused on the positive?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, as I said, we talked to Alan about our final series, the Tempest series. I really want to effectively finish long form comics, shall we say. On a happy note, I don't want to be all miserable and bitter and twisted, because that so easily happen. I've witnessed it over here with artists and older artists than me, and of course there's American examples as well. Just people who are brilliant people who are completely broken by the experience. And no, I remember all the happy times. I can laugh at the times that weren't happy now, because they're in the past, hopefully. And it's been a good role. I mean, I've done more than I expected back when I walked into the Fleetway building. It's been quite an experience. And as soon as of course, people were reading that I finished in comics, I immediately, not immediately, months later, I got a call from Tony Bennett at Knockabout telling me the 8 pages of comics for Steve Moore and Alan Moore's Magic book were going to be needed. I promised them sort of 15 years earlier, and hadn't done them because the book didn't look any closer to coming out. So I've done that, and some extra pages, design pages, and a cover for Cinema Purgatorio, which I should be seeing the proofs of tomorrow, with any luck. I think that's coming out, and that strip was a total busman's holiday for me. So I love stories of old Hollywood and horror, and that was good. No, I have no. I don't want to be a miserabilist interview subject. I've definitely found things were either good, exciting, or they were terrible but funny. You got to see the funny side, you know. It's and I did make a terrible error when we first spoke. I said my first published work. I think you mentioned it. It was for a H.P. Lovecraft story.
Yeah.
And I described it as a man riding a dragon. Well, when I see anyone from the NHS or a GP and I ask them what my allergies are, top of the list is dragons. It was actually an albino bat-winged creature from, I don't know, the Unknown Quest of Kadaf. I think that was a story. But I don't know why. Like, I'm just going to throw this in at the end, you know, as a gift. You know. But ever since I was a kid, I've always disliked dragons. Reluctant dragons, or I don't know, Sean Connery dragons, Tolkien dragons, Game of Thrones dragon eggs. That was enough to make me stop watching that, you know. And I can't explain it, you know. Probably need a psychiatrist, you know. But I think it's because they speak. They're disappointing sort of monsters. They're disappointing dinosaurs. And they have sort of arbitrary powers. Anyway, I just thought I'd throw that in. You know, it loops around to the beginning of this interminable conversation people have to listen to. You know, your delightful questions and my meanderings. You know,
not at all. Not at all. I found it fascinating. I must admit, there was when you mentioned about nearly drowning at was it Putney Bridge?
Yeah.
I was reminded of what you said about, you know, dying at your desk with a pen in your hand. It's like, if you're going to die on the job, make it a bit more interesting. Dying of a heart attack at your desk. You know. Kevin O'Neill was last seen wading out into the River Thames at Putney and was never seen again.
You know, the other thing you just reminded me of, I really must go, but I should. I had a sort of a steel claw background in my childhood, in as much as from very young until my early 20s, I used to get electrocuted regularly, but not vanish, sadly. You know, I somehow had a knack for getting electrocuted, you know. Climbing through a very narrow loft, and the cabling electrocuted me. Electric meter. Someone told me my father-in-law should turn the electric back on. It blew up, and I went flying across the floorboards. I'm a survivor. What can I say?
Absolutely. I mean, that possibly explains an awful lot. If I'm honest.
Yeah, it's sort of working class electroshock treatment, isn't it? You know, yes, I think I'm about ready for another dose. I must go under the stairs, see where the meter is. You know.
Oh, amazing! What a note to end on. I think. Wow. What more is there to say apart from thank you, Kev, for such an absolutely enthralling, 4 or 5 hours of chat. It's just so kind to be able to sit down and talk about the ups and downs of his comic career. Great to hear he's not retired. If you want to check out his work for 2000 AD, it's available in a variety of formats. Go along to shop.2000ad.com. And there's sections on Nemesis and Robusters, etc., etc., etc. One thing I didn't ask him about was his Judge Dredd work, which is always a favourite of mine, which you can find in the complete case files. We're going to be back in 7 days' time for more from the Galaxy's Greatest podcast, as we look forward to some stuff that's coming up in the Galaxy's Greatest comic over the coming weeks. Until then, Earthlets, hope you're still staying safe, hope you're still taking care of one another, and we'll see you in a week's time. Splundig Verthrig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the Galaxy's Greatest Comic at 2000adonline.com.